Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's talk at the State Library of New South Wales. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and by paying my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that respect to any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people who are present here tonight. My name is Adam Gottschalk. I'm an Anne Cantor Fellow at the Australia Institute, and it's my pleasure to be your MC this evening. The Australia Institute is celebrating its 30th anniversary as Australia's leading think tank this year, and we're hosting a program of events to discuss our biggest ideas. We couldn't do what we do without our supporters, so thank you very much for being here tonight. Your support is the reason we can keep fighting the big fights. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our special guest speaker tonight, the Australia Institute's Executive Director, Dr. Richard Dennis. As most of you would know, Richard is a prominent economist, author, and public policy commentator, and a former associate professor in the Crawford School of Public Policy at the ANU. He's here tonight to debunk the nonsensical economic arguments used to justify our ongoing failure to reduce inequality and to discuss the solutions available for any parliament that is serious about closing the widening gap between rich and poor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Richard Dennis.
Thanks so much, everybody, and thanks, Adam and Viv, another young woman who works here at the Australia Institute, two of our Anne Cantor Fellows. Australia Institute has a fellowship program where we bring in 5 or 6 young people every year, teach them as much as we can, and hopefully help them find great jobs out there working to change the world. So thanks so much, Adam, and thanks so much, to you all for being here tonight to help kick me off. We're doing a national speaking tour around inequality, and you guys are the canaries in the coal mine, dare I say. Thank you for coming out to talk about something as important as inequality. Australia is, of course, one of the richest countries in the world, and we live at, from a material point of view, the richest point in world history. Australia's GDP, our total national income, is about the size of a little European country called Russia's. Now, Russia has a somewhat more, shall we say, independent approach to foreign policy than Australia. Not necessarily in a good way, but there are other countries in the world, our size or indeed smaller, who feel that they can contribute far more to the world than Australians do. Because the real trick of neoliberalism is to make some of the richest people in the country, some of the richest people in the world, I should say, feel poor. Now, I'm not saying that every Australian is rich, far from it. It's far worse than that. But here we sit in one of the richest cities, in one of the richest countries in the world, and there are Australians that can't afford food. There are Australians who can't afford housing. And of course, as a nation, we're told we couldn't possibly afford to, provide free health to everybody or, say, tackle climate change. We've been told for decades that if we cut taxes and cut wages and privatise and deregulate enough, then one day we'll be able to afford to have nice things. But guess what? 30 years in, and we're still being told, not yet, not yet. But again, we are amongst the richest people in the world. We can afford to do anything we want. We just can't afford to do everything we want. I mean, you must feel proud that you live in a country that's rich enough to afford $300 billion worth of submarines. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? Here was us thinking we were a bit broke, couldn't possibly afford to help the unemployed, couldn't possibly afford to tackle climate change, certainly couldn't afford to put dental care into our medical system, no way. But then Scott Morrison comes along and literally asked Josh Frydenberg, can we afford the $300 billion for a few nuclear submarines? And Josh Frydenberg was quoted as saying, we can always afford it if it's a priority. He's right. He's absolutely right. We are such a rich country that we can afford to drop a lazy 300 bill on some nuclear subs that a few years ago no one thought we wanted or needed. But can we afford to tackle problems that perhaps people in this room think, oh no, money doesn't grow on trees, you know. The problem is so many of our democratic problems have been dressed up as economic problems. They've been concealed from us. But when powerful people want tax cuts, we can always afford them. When powerful people want submarines, apparently we can afford them. You want to increase unemployment benefits? Not so much. So I'm going to talk tonight about a whole range of problems and a whole range of opportunities. But to be clear, and I mean this as an economist, I mean this as someone who's been a close observer and participant in Australian politics for a long time, and I mean this as a citizen. We really can fix these problems. The number one thing holding us back is the belief that we can't. And while we're beavering away trying to find a little bit of money to keep something open, someone else gets a lazy $300 billion to get the subs. There is no shortage of money for these things. There is, however, a shortage of political will. Not from you. I have complete faith in you. I know you want these things. It's just the person sitting next to you I'm a bit worried about. Or maybe the people that aren't in this room here tonight. But that's the trick. The trick of neoliberalism is to lower our expectations, to divide, to conquer, to make us see the world through a prism of tiny little things, that how can we possibly get them all done? Well, actually, we are getting big things done, like $300 billion worth of subs and $300 billion worth of stage 3 tax cuts. So that's why at the Australia Institute, and it's our 30th birthday this year, so to those of and there are some people in the room here I think have been around for 30 years. I saw Michael Raper before, a very old, long-time board member of the Australia Institute. We focus on the big structural issues like tax reform, like climate change, like inequality, like the way our democracy is structured. Because if we don't address these structural issues, if we don't get to the bottom of these things, we get stuck debating the announceables. We get stuck talking about, is some little thing that got announced today better than nothing? And that, again, is neoliberalism's best trick, is to get us to squabble about whether something pathetic is better than nothing, rather than to ask, why can't we have it all? Why can't we fix the big problems? So I want to talk about those big problems tonight, and indeed the big opportunities we have. Because again, and I mean this, we can afford to solve any problem we want. We just can't afford to solve every problem we want. So if our number one problem is submarines and our number two problem is tax cuts, I'm sorry, it will be hard for us to tackle inequality and tackle climate change. But who said subs and taxes had to come first? These are democratic questions. This isn't about economics. This is literally about the way our democracy works. So I'm going to focus on inequality tonight, but there's no doubt that for me and for the work we do at the Australia Institute, issues like inequality, issues like tax reform, issues like the way our democracy work are intertwined. And we have to look at them as a collective. We have to look at how they interact with each other. Because if we don't, we get siloed. Again, that's the neoliberalism trick, to get you to argue with the person next to you about whether we should address Indigenous disadvantage or the quality of aged care first. What should we do first? What should our priority be? Why don't you fight amongst yourselves? Right? Should we give teachers a pay rise or nurses a pay rise, or should we invest more in climate change? You sort it out. You argue with yourselves. I'll just be over here cutting taxes. But you guys, have a workshop. Get out your white paper. Again, it's not an accident. This is genius, and it's been working effectively for a long, long time. So let me just start with a good example, or perhaps a bad example, of how powerful democratic choices are. In Norway, they tax their fossil fuel industry and they give their kids free university education. In Australia, we subsidise our fossil fuel industry and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. That's not economics. That's just a democratic choice about what to prioritise. Indeed, in Australia, our democratic choices add up to a situation where we now collect more revenue from kids repaying their HECS debts than we get from oil and gas companies paying the petroleum resource rent tax. That's a democratic choice. Someone made that decision, both to create the HECS system, to create the petroleum resource rent tax, and for year after year say, yep, that's fine, that's good enough, that's the kind of country they want to live in. Again, I know you don't want to live in that country, but that person sitting next to you is looking worse and worse, aren't they? Because someone in Australia must be happy with this. Someone in Australia must be content. And to be clear, and I'll come to this later, there are plenty of people in Australia that have had a really great cost of living crisis. They've seen their wealth soar. They're not looking around wondering what we're doing wrong. They're sitting quietly hoping that no one will notice what we've done right. So again, Norway, small example of how different countries make different choices. These things aren't complicated. But to be crystal clear, it's not just the choices we make as individuals that matter, it's the choices that our elected governments that matter. And that's, again, the real neoliberal trick, is to convince us all that it's individuals and the choices that individuals make that matter the most. When, of course, and I'll put up some data in a minute because I know that'll get you all excited, that will make quite clear that the choices we make collectively are just as, if not more important than the choices we can make. So let me just start. I mean, I would usually argue that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely, but I do have a treat for you tonight. I'm actually going to put up a little bit of data. Now, I don't do this lightly, but I can't convince you of what I want to convince you of without this. But to do this, I am going to have to explain a little bit of a graph. Okay, so this is a weird sort of graph. Let me just help you out here. So we've got average income, which we're going to measure as GDP per person, gross domestic product. Basically the main way we figure out if people are rich or poor. And then over here, what we've got is the level of tax. So they're basically what percentage of a nation's income it collects in tax. And because we're Australia, I've put Australia right in the middle of the world, all right? Because we are a little bit Australian-centric. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare Australia to all the other countries in the world. But it's going to be painless, relax. And look what I've done here. I've got these countries here. So this is Australia, right? Anyone on this side of us is poorer than us. Anyone on this side is richer than us. Anyone down here collects less tax than us. Anyone up here collects more tax than us. So I'm going to split the world into 4 categories. Now, these are all the countries that collect less tax than us and are poorer than us. So if you've heard that, you have to cut taxes or we'll never be rich, well, it seems like being low tax is also a pretty good way to have a poor country. But they're not the only examples. Up here are countries that collect more tax than us. More tax than us. But they're still poorer than us. So Australia's a rich country, right? Some people are higher tax than us, still poor. Some are lower tax than us, still poor. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I wonder if there's anyone in the world that's richer than Australia, but collects more tax than us. Because we know that's crazy, right? We know that you have to cut taxes to be rich. So let's see if there's any countries that are richer than us that collect more tax than us. Whoop. Denmark, Sweden, Austria, Norway, Netherlands, Germany, Iceland. Quite a few, actually. And look, Luxembourg over here. Now, this is the interesting one. Is there anyone in the world that's richer than Australia? All right, so this is average income per person. Is there anyone in the world that's richer than us with lower taxes than us? Yeah. Saudi Arabia, petrostate. Qatar, petrostate. Singapore, petrostate and tax haven. Brunei, petrostate. UAE, petrostate. United States, hard to describe. Switzerland, tax haven. So just to be clear, there are a few countries around that are richer than us with low taxes. But do you know why the Saudis are so rich and don't collect much tax? Yeah, because the royal family, they own all the oil. They literally own all the oil. And then they sell the oil and they're rich. They have public ownership or royal family ownership of their fossil fuel resources. So anyway, so this is the first one. So average income, the idea that if only we cut taxes, we'd be rich. Yeah, not a lot of evidence to support that. Let's see what else we can discover. Okay, what about happiness? There's a lot of countries. There's a lot of countries that aren't as happy as Australia, but they've got low taxes. You'd think that'd make them happy. And there's some high tax countries that are sad too. We're happier than the French, and we're just a little bit happier than the Germans. Now, I wonder if there's any countries that are high tax and happy. I wonder if there's any high tax happy countries. Oh, look at that. Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Netherlands, Luxembourg. Bit of a pattern emerging, some might say. What about this one? There must be rich, low tax, happy countries, yeah? No. Kind of Sweden, all right. Switzerland, maybe. All right, so it's as if, like if you were searching for higher happiness, you wouldn't probably go looking in the low tax place. Let's have a look what else we can find. All right, this is a fancy one, Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index. This is life expectancy, this is literacy rates and inequality. Just quickly, look at that, lots, and this we're still comparing it all to tax, right? So there's lots of low tax countries over here that have got poor Human Development Index scores and not so equal. Turns out there's some high tax countries that don't do so great compared to Australia. Australia's in the middle of the world here. Now I wonder if anyone can guess what's going to happen. I wonder if there's any countries that collect more tax than us and have better life expectancy, education outcomes. Oh, bugger me. Who'd have thought? Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Is it like there's a pattern or something here? Now what about this? What about the low tax countries that are doing heaps better than Australia on the Human Development Index? I wonder. Oh, there's Switzerland just messing with our heads. Yes, again. There it is. So, big picture, this quadrant, like this is like, if you thought that tax cuts were good, if you thought that tax cuts would make the economy strong, if you thought that tax cuts would mean that we could sort of spend our own hard-earned money on better health, better education, because who wants to leave your money with the government, then this bottom quadrant would be kind of full all the time. But actually, what we find is that the countries, really, again, Australia is one of the richest countries in the world, and we're actually doing all right by a whole bunch of indicators. Pretty poorly on some, which I'll come to in a minute. But if Australia was to look around the world and think, all right, who's doing better than us? Well, when you're talking about income per person, when you're talking about happiness, when you're talking about Human Development Index, if you want to go shopping for countries that are doing better than us, they're nearly all high tax countries or outlier tax haven petrostates, which maybe that's what Australia's trying to become. Now, one last one, and then there'll be no more PowerPoint, I promise. Democracy. It's kind of handy. I like democracy. Democracy gets a bad name. I'm quite a fan. I don't like it when people say politicians are all the same. They just said votes don't count. Whenever you hear someone say politicians are all the same, you just heard them say it doesn't matter who you vote for, nothing will change. That's exactly what people who don't want change want people to believe. And sadly, a growing proportion of young people around the world actually believe that democracy's not that flash. I wonder why. Have they ever heard anyone make a positive statement about the role of the state? In 30 years of privatising, deregulating, cutting taxes, what have we told people? Government's bad, government's inefficient, you need to leave things to the market, government will just waste your money. Turns out when you tell people that for 30 years, some people actually think it's true. And they think, well, why would it matter who I vote for? Nothing's going to change. So again, sadly, around the world, democracy's in a bit of trouble. I wonder which countries it's in the most trouble. If only I had some data. Okay, so here are the countries that collect less tax than Australia that don't do so well in the measured indicators of democracy. Guess what? Lots of countries. But don't worry, there's some countries that collect more tax than us, and they haven't got it sorted either. But I wonder if there's any countries up here, countries that collect more tax than us and have better democratic indicators. Oh, who'd have thought? Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Iceland, Canada, New Zealand. Now, I wonder, who's going to be down here? Who are the countries that collect less tax than Australia and have better democracies than Australia? Not even Switzerland. So, I'm going to move on from that data now. But I can't stress this enough. What we've been told in Australia for decades is that the smaller our government, the less tax we collect. The less tax we collect, the less money we spend on health, the less money we spend on education, the less money we spend on transport, just the less money we spend collectively. For 30 years we've been told if we cut taxes and cut spending, things will get better. But by objective measures, by opinion poll measures, and I reckon if we ask around when we get to question time, most people probably aren't convinced that Australia's heading in the right direction at the moment. But to be clear, according to the pinko lefty communists at the International Monetary Fund, the OECD and the World Bank, where we got most of that data from, the countries that are doing better than Australia on productivity, on health and education, on inequality, they're the countries that are actually collecting more tax than us. Now, it's not because tax solves all problems. Governments could collect tax. We could have a poll tax. We could charge everyone $5,000 a head, and we could spend the money on even more subsidies for the fossil fuel industry. This is not actually going to help solve most of our problems. But tax does play a central economic role and a central democratic role in helping a society have a conversation about what does it want more of and what does it want less of. Now, I've got some really complicated economic theory to give you here. I want you to try and remember this. According to economics, you should tax things you want less of and subsidise things you want more of. That's it. Shall I go back over it again? It's very complicated. We should tax things you want less of and subsidise things you want more of. Did I mention that in Norway they give away free university education and tax the fossil fuel industry? But in Australia, we spend $14 billion a year subsidising the fossil fuel industry, and we charge our kids a fortune to go to uni. So the things we choose to tax and what we choose to spend the money on are absolutely essential, not just for creating a strong and stable economy, but for creating the kind of society that people want to live in. Now, a lot of Australians are struggling with a cost of living crisis at the moment. A lot of Australians are struggling with, for example, the cost of childcare, the cost of, in many places, private schools, for many people, private health insurance. Do you know how much they spend on childcare in Norway? And it's gone up 10%. I'm not kidding. When you provide essential services for free, guess what happens in a cost of living crisis? A lot less crisis. But when you've privatised and outsourced and deregulated everything, guess what happens? It's not just grocery prices going up. It's not just privatised electricity going up. It's not just privatised other bills going up. But literally essential services like childcare and healthcare are going up when in other countries where they choose to collect more tax and spend more money on essential services, the prices of those essential services by definition can't rise because they're free. So when we're talking about how to address inequality, we can and we should and we must talk about things like the fact that unemployment benefits in Australia are sickeningly low and have stayed that way for decades by choice. The only time unemployment benefits rose above the poverty line was in the middle of the COVID crisis. And that was because we thought middle-class people might become unemployed. So it was okay to increase unemployment benefits. And then the minute the crisis passed, what did we do? We cut them again. It's government choices that cause inequality. Government choices to provide tax cuts to high-income earners, government choices to tax capital gains lightly, government choices to having pushed unemployment benefits above the poverty line for the first time in decades to then cut them again. And the choices that we make in Australia are simply nasty. They're nasty. We just gave away hundreds of billions of dollars in the stage 3 tax cuts and told ourselves we can't afford to increase unemployment benefits, or we can't afford to help women fleeing domestic violence, or we can't afford to address Indigenous disadvantage, or we can't afford to put dental care into the Medicare system. So let me help you out with decoding a little bit of economics. Whenever you hear a politician in a rich country say they can't afford to do something, what you actually heard them say was, I don't want to. I don't want to. I've got other priorities than that. But that's a bit brutal, isn't it? That's a bit hard to hear. It's a bit insulting being that honest with someone about their priorities. Now, my kids often nag me about getting me to do things that I don't want to do. Now, I don't know about you, you're probably better parents than me, but rather than tell my kids that I don't want to take them to Disneyland, I just lie and tell them I can't afford it. No, I know you're heaps better than me. All right, you're better people. You sit down and you discuss priorities and you go through it with your kids or your grandkids and you explain to them why you'd rather rot in hell than do the thing that they want you to do. But, you know, I don't live in a democracy. I literally live in a patriarchy when I'm dealing with my kids. I don't have to explain myself to them. Although as they got a bit older, they did start to say, so how much do you earn, Dad? I'd say, none of your business, kids. Because I'm not their elected representative. I'm their dad. Now you laugh, but your elected representatives treat you like that all the time. That's what they're telling you all the time. They're saying, I hear that you would like to spend more on health and education. I hear that you would like to tackle climate change. I hear you'd like to address Indigenous disadvantage, but yeah, nah. I'd like to announce a $1.5 billion new subsidy for the Middle Arm gas project in Darwin in Labor's first budget. $1.5 billion for a new fossil fuel subsidy. I'd rather keep spending $14 billion a year on fossil fuel subsidies. I've got these promised stage 3 tax cuts. Don't you know how expensive these submarines are? But I'd like to spend more on your priorities. I would, except I wouldn't. So I don't. But we're all a bit polite about it. And we all pretend that there's some form of unfortunate problem that if only there was a solution to. Well, again, I'll end where I started. We live in one of the richest countries in the world. We can afford to do anything we want. We just can't afford to do everything we want. So after we do the stage 3 tax cuts, and after we do the submarines, and after we do the tax concessions for super, and after we do the capital gains tax concessions, and after, it turns out we can't afford to do the thing that you wanted. Can't afford has no meaning in that conversation. It is literally just about priorities. Other countries make better decisions than us. Other countries have found a way to deliver inequality-adjusted human development indexes with higher taxes than us. This is not a surprise. It is a choice. It's a choice that's made in other countries, and it's a choice that's been delegitimised in Australia. Because for decades, we've been told by successive governments, state and federal, Labor and Liberal, that the only way forward is for us to cut taxes, cut wages, privatise, deregulate and become competitive, whatever that means. But in terms of international affairs, well, the high tax, high wage countries are clearly very competitive. I fear all we've done is make individuals, NGOs and our society competitive with each other. And unfortunately, the consequences for that, I think, are quite severe when we think about democracy. And when you look at what's happening in the US at the moment, that's what happens, I fear, when you build that much distrust, when you build that much inequality. So to conclude, if we can afford to do anything we want, but we can't afford to do everything we want, unless we find a way to bring more people into that conversation about what do we want, we may well wind up with a community like the US, which might struggle to make decisions at all. Thank you very much. Now we've got time for questions, and Adam's got a mic, so if you'd like to ask a question, stick your hand up. I'm going to be brutal and mock people that make speeches instead of ask questions, so I'll just warn everybody that I might seem funny, but I can be turned nasty in a flash.
Thanks, Richard. I think I can go out on a limb and suggest that everyone here knows that on the issues you're talking about, inequality and tax, that the coalition are absolute crap, and that probably they also know that the Greens are very much interested in what you're on about and trying their best. So my question is to you, what is wrong? What the hell is wrong with Labor?
Look, from my point of view, the problem with Labor is that they went to the election with a very modest agenda, and they made a virtue out of doing nothing but deliver that modest agenda. If you think about what the Prime Minister said soon after the election, he was adamant that he was going to do what he said and said what he did. And, you know, after the chaos of the Morrison government, the last thing Australia needed was announceables every day. And you know what, there's real merit in that. There's no doubt that Australians, I think, had started to lose faith in the democratic project. And, you know, the coalition really making a virtue out of linking all public spending, you know, whether it was car parks or sports, you know, toilet blocks, all those colour-coded website spreadsheets. I think Australia was really heading down quite a dangerous path, treating public spending and public policy so politically. And indeed, I think it was a virtue that Labor went to the election promising that it was going to adopt a different approach. But whether by design or by accident, the consequences of that is really a government that now who's so committed to promises made 4 years ago, it's unwilling or unable to actually adapt to the circumstances we live in. Like, no one predicted the cost of living crisis we're in the middle of. And the fact that Scott Morrison, as Treasurer, created the stage 3 tax cuts back when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, the fact that Scott Morrison made those tax cuts before COVID was ever anticipated, let alone the cost of living crisis we're in, and that Labor committed to those tax cuts in the lead up to the last election. Well, you know, when circumstances change, sometimes you have to change your decisions as well. So, yeah, I think the kindest way I can put it is that Labor are committed to doing what they said they'd do, and they didn't commit to doing much. And the circumstances we're in, but now the circumstances we're in require a lot more than that. They really do. So I think we saw, and you know, I'm really proud of the role the Australia Institute played in getting them to change their mind on the stage 3 tax cuts. But frankly, it shouldn't have been that hard. Oh, thank you. We were about to give $9,000 a year to people earning over $200,000 and literally not a cent to people earning below 45. And just a month before the government changed its position, which I'm glad it did, the Prime Minister was saying that everyone earning over $45,000 would get something, when what he meant was people below 45 were going to get nothing, and people earning $45,100 were going to get about 50 cents. So, you know, even in the midst of that crisis, they were looking for a way to not do what's needed. So I think that, you know, and hats off to them, I think that they made the right decision in changing their mind. But to be clear, we just cut the tax cuts for high income earners from $9,000 for high income earners to $4,000 for high income earners. Still a pretty good time to be rich in Australia. So, look, the problem I think now is, so what should we, the collective we, expect from a government in the lead up to the next election? Because the current Prime Minister has made clear that he'll only do what he's committed to do in the lead up to an election. So if we can't get commitments out of them before an election, does that mean we're just supposed to give up for another 3 years? Now, to give you a sense of this, you know, I'm obviously quite concerned about climate change. We're in the middle of what the UN Secretary-General calls the critical decade. The critical decade. And emissions are still rising. Right? Australia's emissions are going up, the world's emissions are going up. No one's actually started to transition away from fossil fuels yet. We're still opening new projects. But it's 2025 next year, that's halfway through the critical decade. The next term will see us to 2028. So at some point, people have to grasp the nettle, whether it's on how many years should people have to live in poverty for, or how many years should we keep pouring more subsidies onto fossil fuels for. But whether Labor commits to those things in the lead up to the election or not, I don't know. But I think the most likely outcome at the moment will be a minority Labor government in the lower house and a minority in the upper house. And maybe, when Julia Gillard had a minority government, she delivered a carbon price, she delivered the NDIS, she delivered a Royal Commission. It was horrible, wasn't it? It was chaos. Chaos, they tell me. I actually thought it looked pretty bloody progressive, which is why they hated it so much.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. It bothers me about the US outcome, the forthcoming election in the US. It bothers me that people are being retrenched all over the place now as AI takes over. How could Australia be competitive in this world when we're subsidising fossil fuels? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I mean, technology has always disrupted things. I mean, tractors were terrible job destroyers. Tractors replaced mainly men working with shovels and picks and mattocks in fields. But I tell you what, when the tractors came along and they lost their jobs, it was still a tough couple of years. So technology is always coming along and disrupting things. AI will come along and disrupt things. I mean, the greatest job disruptor we've seen, it's not climate change or renewable energy, it's one of these bad boys. Do you remember ringing people to book things? Anyone here old enough to remember ringing people to book things? No, I'm not kidding. Like that displaced, this thing displaced hundreds of thousands of jobs, mainly for women. There's 50,000 people working in fossil fuels in Australia. 50,000. There's 25 million of us. Oil, coal and gas employ around 50,000 people. And people are worried about, all the disruption that will come with tackling climate change. No, it'll be fine. This thing was far more disruptive. Remember street directories? No, I'm not kidding. Like, think about all the industries that this thing destroyed. So changing where the electrons that come out of our sockets, that's nothing. That's nothing. We'll sort that out in no time when we want to. AI, you bet. AI will displace a whole bunch of jobs. I'm more worried about AI than I am about this thing, although then again, some people are worried about these things. But the short answer is, again, Australia is one of the richest countries in the world. And if you think anyone's going to be able to cope with that stuff, it's going to be us. How do most of those countries I put up there before, how are they going to cope with AI? Well, it's going to hurt them as much, if not more, but potentially it's going to help us as well. To be clear, I think, AI in journalism is a contradiction in terms, but using AI to spot bots on Twitter and shut them down, that'd be great. No, I mean, there are going to be good things to do with AI as well. And just, sorry to be pedantic, but it's not artificial intelligence, it's not intelligent at all. It's just kind of dumb computer software. Like, it's not intelligence, it's not intelligent, it's not aware, it's not any of the things that we think of as intelligent. It's just the ability to process enormous volumes of data quickly. That's kind of handy, but it's also kind of dangerous too. But no, I think we just need to keep our eye on the prize, and unlike Facebook and unlike Twitter and unlike TikTok and unlike Google, we need to think about these things as they're evolving and regulate them as they're evolving, rather than say, what could go wrong? And then say, it's too big to regulate now. Like, if you're worried about AI, the time to think about it is before it's everywhere, not after it's declining your insurance request. That's coming.
The Federal Treasury's got now this measuring what matters framework, which is supposed to measure things other than just the financial aspect of the budget. Do you have high hopes for that?
Well, I think the Australia Institute can literally take credit for the measuring what matters phrase. We actually put out a series of reports around 2010 saying that we needed to move on from our obsession with GDP and start to measure what matters. So conceptually, I've got no problem with it at all. The way it's being implemented, I think, is potentially quite dangerous, and at the moment, I think underwhelming more than dangerous. So, for example, we spend $14 billion a year on fossil fuel subsidies. What wellbeing framework could anyone conceive of where subsidising a pollutant is a good idea? So that's kind of proof to me that the government, even though it might be well-intentioned in saying let's collect more information, let's try and evaluate these things more broadly, but the fact that having a wellbeing framework has not made a single fossil fuel executive nervous is, I think, proof that it doesn't actually, the rubber doesn't hit the road. Now, there's a bigger problem with these things, and again, I started talking before about, I'm old-fashioned, I think democracy is really important. A lot of people believe, maybe sincerely, but I certainly don't, that if only we kind of collected enough data and we came up with the right indicator, say we found the way to measure well-being, then all of a sudden we could just kind of objectively make good policy decisions. To be clear, I don't believe this for a second. I've spent my life in the weeds of trying to do this stuff, and I'll put it simply, I think it's a fool's errand, I think it's dangerous, I think it's impossible to actually come up with the meaning of life and express it in a number. And I say the meaning of life literally, because imagine we were to say, well, let's replace GDP with our fancy new wellbeing indicator, and we can now consult the wellbeing indicator to decide the best way to solve problems. Okay, so let's do that. Let's help design that indicator. Is lengthening the life of people in aged care by giving them better nutrition and care more or less important than saving children dying in remote Indigenous communities? How shall we attach a weight to those two things? How should we measure the well-beingness of improving the quality of life of an infant and improving the quality of life of an elderly person? Now, I hear someone in the room thinking, oh, I know how to do this. And there are plenty of people out there trying. So step one, I want you to understand that if we're going to come up with a measure of well-being, we would have to be able to quantify all sorts of things. Not just infants versus the elderly, but what about saving the platypus versus improving educational outcomes in schools? We'd have to just come up with a number to juggle that, right? But then go up a level. How much well-being would we have got if we'd created the voice? How many units of happiness is that? How would Treasury quantify that? Or if the US let's do it in the US and you just elected Donald Trump. Does that have an adverse impact or a positive impact or no impact? My point is no one can answer these questions. It's just a permanent struggle. It's a permanent conversation. It's a permanent debate about what our priorities are. So I don't mind that, governments are doing a more systematic job of collecting information and making it available. But as long as we're still telling ourselves we can afford tax cuts and can't afford to address health disadvantage in remote Indigenous communities, then we're ignoring any wellbeing indicators you can think of. As long as we're still subsidising fossil fuels and we can't afford to subsidise dental care, then, no indicator in the world. I don't need any new fancy numbers to call that stuff out. So, yeah, unfortunately, in fact, Jim Chalmers announced that wellbeing indicator framework as a policy from opposition at a launch of one of my books in Queensland. So thanks, Jim. That was good. He got mocked the next day. Front page of the Oz said he was going to be doing yoga and wearing beads from now on because he was moving away from the obsession with GDP. And I just say this because I feel sympathy for them for trying, right? Because they actually got attacked for saying, let's not just obsess about GDP, let's try and measure other things. That was a good idea, and they got attacked for that. And now I'm attacking them tonight, saying, but look at you hypocrites, you're still subsidising fossil fuels. Democracy's hard. Better data's good, but ultimately we have to make value judgments.
Richard, you tell a very compelling story, and it's an empowering story, I think, to be aware that these are political issues with political solutions. And I think the Australia Institute does a really good job of telling that story clearly and concisely and with the data to back it up. But it's not a story that the Australia Institute can carry forward alone if it's going to have the impact that we need it to have in the time that we have available to us. So I'm wondering if you have a strategy or an idea about how we as a country can take this story forward so that it has the power that it needs.
Oh, you could have talked for as long as you wanted, by the way, so... Thank you. Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I get asked it a lot, and this isn't what you said, but often I'll hear people say, oh, thanks, tonight was fun, it was great, but you're preaching to the converted. I'm like, yeah, that never worked for the church. Every Sunday, same people, So step one, talking to people who do agree with you is really a big, important part of driving change, building awareness, building shared language. So part of our strategy is to talk to lots of people, including people that will come out on a weeknight and talk about inequality or climate change or something else. So that's part of it. A very big part of what we do is obviously research. And, most of our research gets some media coverage, but a lot of our research is not just designed for us to get media coverage for it, it's designed to help other people in other organisations win fights. Less so these days now that I'm back as Executive Director, but couldn't tell you how many times myself or our current Research Director, Rod Campbell, how much time we've spent in court cases, arguing before courts that some stupid mine shouldn't go ahead. Successfully, I might add, at times. We helped stop a mine up in the Hunter Valley. They said it was going to create 44,000 jobs, and I argued that it would create none. Rio Tinto, you might have heard of them, little mining company. 44,000 jobs was their claim. We showed up and said, how about none? We won. They appealed. We won. But then the head of coal from Rio Tinto in London flew to Sydney, because obviously all the coal's in London, flew to Sydney, met with the then Premier Barry O'Farrell, got the law changed, and the mine went ahead. No, you've got to know this, right? Because having the evidence is part of winning, but actually having the power to drive change is another part of winning. Now, I should have given him a bottle of Grange. So I guess I'm trying to answer your question step by step. Part of what we do is talk to people. Part of what we do lots of research on a very wide range of topics. The research hopefully gets a broad audience. You know, we've got great people like Greg Jericho writes regularly for The Guardian, Polly Hemming does our climate stuff, Bill Brown runs our accountability and democracy program. They're always in the media. But the media is just one step in communicating with people. We do a lot of work behind the scenes with NGOs. We do a lot of work behind the scenes with members of parliament, including government MPs who maybe think their minister might be bullshitting at times. Not everyone in Labor was happy about the gas strategy, you might be surprised to learn. And then there is, like, I don't know, is it today or tomorrow that we got Purple Pingers doing a webinar for us on. Like we work with all sorts of other people who do much better than I can or a think tank can at communicating with some audiences. So if you're not following him already, check out Punters Politics on Twitter. Absolutely hilarious. Takes a lot of our research and aims it at young people. Purple Pingers, no credit for his work, but he's done amazing work in alerting people to the impact of a rental crisis. Do we want to platform people like him whenever we get the chance? So there's no right way to do it, but a big part of what we do is put good evidence, good ideas and good arguments in other people's hands. And I said before, I think a minority government's quite a likely outcome. There's no doubt that independents and minor party MPs are far more open to our ideas, our evidence and our arguments than the average minister. I won't necessarily say than the average backbencher in a major party, but the reality is once you've been captured by the department, once you get the full court press from the lobbyists, it's a lot harder. Whereas members of parliament who are more worried about what their electorate thinks than what the caucus thinks or a lobbyist thinks, they're a lot more susceptible to, I think, good ideas and good arguments, not just from us, as in the Australian Institute, but from everyone. So, yeah, look, it's frustrating. I wish things would change faster, but again, I like democracy, and people keep voting for tax cuts and really shitty policies, but I don't think they really know what they're voting for and why. And that's why I spend so much time trying to make the opportunity cost as simple as I can. That when you vote for this, you gave up on the chance to get that. All right, we might have time for maybe one or two more questions. I hope they're as flattering as that one.
Thank you. Like you were saying earlier, a lot of young people pay the HECS than the business people who would profit by subsidizing fossil fuels. Is it just me, but in a democracy, it's a no-brainer as to which is more votes. So why is it still hard to do the most basest form of populist politics than sort of what was going on right now?
Yeah, what a great question. Look, I like politics, I like politicians, even ones I'd never vote for. I hate some I have voted for. No, because they're humans, right? And it's a tough job, and you can't have a democracy without politicians. I think you've really put your finger on one of the most confusing elements of Australian democracy. And I think a lot of community organisations, a lot of citizens get really disempowered when they see opinion polls saying 80% of people think fossil fuel subsidies are a bad idea, but bipartisan support for the fossil fuel subsidies. Or, so there's often this disconnect between clearly what people would prefer and what happens. Now, there's no one simple explanation why, but let me give you what I think is a big part of it. Politics is, well, if you just think of traditional politics in Australia, two-party politics, it's a game of chess. or it's a two-player game. It's a game of tennis, it's a two-player game. So if I win, you lose. And if you lose, I win. So in a two-player game, I just have to avoid losing in order to win. It's pretty boring to watch two people try to avoid losing. Does anyone remember 12-metre yacht racing? Remember that boring thing where they just sailed around all over? Anyway, there's lots of boring games where people are trying not to lose. Democracy shouldn't be a boring game where people are trying not to lose. Democracy should be an exciting game where people are saying, if you vote for me, here's what I'll do. Whereas what it's become is if you vote to them, that's what they'll do. All right, so democracy thrives on high expectations, but the smart strategy in Australia has been to keep your head down, blame them. Keep your head down, blame them. And then everyone's like, what a boring game, why would I watch? What's this got to do with your question? Well, neither party wants to have a giant fight with the very powerful, very wealthy fossil fuel industry in Australia. Neither party wants to have that fight. Now, if I suspect you don't want to have that fight, and I think, well, if I don't have it, then we can call that a draw and we can go and fight about immigration instead. Or we can go, no, you see what I mean? Like, so in a two-player game, if I'm worried that a policy will upset a powerful group, and I know that you will never upset that powerful group, why don't we just call it a draw and shift the debate to something else? And this has happened time and time again. It's happened with junk food advertising. 90% of people think we should ban junk food advertising to kids. We're not going to. Why not? Because neither major party wants to be the one to say it first and simultaneously piss off the junk food industry, Coles, Woolworths, and every television station. Right? So we get all these issues that everyone thinks we should fix, but both major parties are like, nah, I'm not going first. But here's the good news. With independents and minor parties offering up more choices, effectively what was a smart strategy in a two-player game is a very dangerous strategy in a three- or a four-player game. And that's why things are actually starting to shift in Australia at the moment. Not because independents are just better people than Labor or Liberal MPs, but because they can actually ask their community, what do you think? And then deliver on what the community thinks. And that's all they have to do. If they keep doing that, they win their seat. So the incentives for minor parties and independents are different from the incentive for the major parties, and they're busting up the oligopoly, I think, is kind of creating a more fertile environment for those sort of things. All right, one more quick question and then I'll shut up, I promise. We'll just wait for the mic.
If you were treasurer with complete authority,
Donald Trump.
what changes would you make to make Australia more equal? Because you've concentrated on the gross taxation,
Yep.
but you haven't discussed the types of taxation.
Oh, what a great Dorothy Dixon to end on. So I will answer as clearly as I can in a sec, but before I do, let me just make the point, we just all have to understand that if we want to have bigger, better public services, we are going to have to collect more tax. The numbers don't have to even out each year, but you can't have a really big public sector with a really small tax base. So I'm excited that I'm in a room full of people saying, tell me more about tax, Richard, get more detailed. This is my kind of crowd. So, look, well, the first thing I would do, the absolute first thing I would do is scrap fossil fuel subsidies. All right. Yeah. Right. Literally shoveling money out the door to encourage something we don't want to happen. Right. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for a carbon tax, but it took a special kind of dumb to ignore the fossil fuel subsidies first and jump straight to the carbon tax. All right. There is political strategy that matters too. So everyone thinks the fossil fuel subsidies are dumb, including Liberal voters who want a small government. Right, so step one, stop subsidising dumb things. Step two, start taxing bad things. And I would stick a price on fossil fuel exports. Right, I would stick a price on pollution. And you know what? That will increase prices for some people. But guess what? We can then go and spend all the money redistributing and helping people out. I would have a wealth tax in Australia. All right, now where it kicks in, I'll let you guys fight it out, all right? But while you're fighting it out, don't settle for none. All right, so don't tear each other to pieces saying should all wealth be taxed or only over $1 million or only over 10 million, because the longer you fight about that, the longer Gina pays none. So how about we just start with a big one and bring it down over time? All right, so we should be taxing wealth. We should, tax concessions for superannuation. They're like a magnifying glass for inequality. Right, they just take the inequality in your working life and make it worse in retirement. It's sick, it's horrible, it's terrible for women. Like, it's just obscene. And it's costing us a fortune. We spend nearly as much on tax concessions for super as we do on the actual age pension. There's no such thing as a self-funded retiree in Australia. Sorry to pop your bubble if you came in here feeling all smug and self-funded retiree. Good on you. I don't hate you. But boy, a hell of a lot of your super came from other people's, from the tax concessions. And look around the world, it's just not what rich, equal countries have done. So anyway, any one of those things would be transformative. And if we did all of those things, you know what? We would be such a high tax country, we'd be on line with about average. Because we're a low tax country. That's the big lie. The big lie is that we're a high tax country. We're not. We're a low tax country. Norway's a high tax country. Sweden's a high tax country. Do you remember where they were on all the indicators? Doing better than us. So any one of those reforms would be good. And you know what? Here's the saddest story I can tell. Labor went to the 2019 election when Bill Shorten was Prime Minister, opposition leader. You know what he promised to do? Halve the capital gains tax discount, reform negative gearing, get rid of franking credits or refunds, and oppose full opposition to the stage 3 tax cuts. But it was so spectacularly unfair that there were huge swings to Labor in all the rich seats. I'm not kidding. You've all forgotten what actually happened in 2019 because it was so traumatic. And I'll let you go in a minute, but I've got to tell you this. Before the 2019 election, the Monthly asked me to write an essay about the 2019 election. I said, no problem. They said, it's due 2 days after the election. I said, problem. And they said, well, why don't you write most of it before the election? Because we all know what's going to happen. I said, good idea. Bad idea. Anyway, I wrote the essay. It was a day late. And the first sentence was, this is not the first draft of this essay. But I know this very well because it was burned into my soul, because not only did I have to live the 2019 election result, I had to live rewriting the whole essay about what happened. But here's what happened in 2019. Labor thought they were going to lose 1 seat in Queensland, Herbert, and they were going to win lots of seats in New South Wales, lots of seats in Victoria, lots of seats in South Australia, and win government. They were going to lose 1 in Queensland, they were going to win lots over here. But actually what happened was they lost a whole 2 in Queensland. 2, I tell you, 2, instead of 1. But they won no seats in New South Wales, and they won no seats in Victoria, and they won no seats in South Australia, and they lost 2 seats in Tasmania, the lowest income electorates in Australia, Bass and Braddon. And they lost by 1 seat. Bass and Braddon, do you think it was the franking credits? Do you think it was the capital gains tax? Do you think it was the negative gearing? No. Do you think it was the Adani coal mine that cost them Bass and Braddon? No. It was just a fear campaign about tax. And it worked on the lowest income voters. But here's the good news. Big swings to Labor in 2019. Big swings in 2019 to Labor in Kooyong, in Goldstein, in North Sydney. Does this sound familiar? In Wentworth. Josh Frydenberg had a 12% margin going into the 2019 election. He came out with 6, and he lost it the next time. High-income Australians swung Labor in 2019. They swung Labor big in 2019, and Labor lost Bass and Braddon and didn't pick up any of the seats that they were after and lost the election. So to end on a positive note, when Labor took a progressive agenda to 2019, it was rich people that voted for them. It was a scare campaign about tax that cost them the election. And then they went to 2022 with wet lettuce, and here we are. So, no, well, they did, right? They admit it. They admit it. So, look, so I guess my point is, don't fall for the idea that high-income voters are all greedy and hate Australia and only care about themselves. Have a look at the 2019 election results. Read my essay from 2019 if you want. But high-income electorates swung hard to Labor when Labor was promising redistribution. It didn't work. So they ditched that, went with the stage 3 tax cuts and a whole bunch of other things, and now we're kind of stuck a bit. So I'm just going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for coming. I'll get in trouble if I don't put up my next slide and say it's our 30th anniversary, and we're trying to get a whole bunch of monthly donors to help us do even bigger and better things in the lead up to the next election. We know we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, so thank you for coming. Absolutely no guilt trip if you can't afford to support us, but if you can, if you wish you were paying more tax and can't, you can give it to us. And I mean it. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your question. An essential part of our strategy to change the country, and I think we have, and I think we will, an essential part is convincing people like yourself that change is possible. And if we don't remember that we can change things, if we fall for the idea that there is no alternative, then the people who are happy with the way things are will be happy with our despondency. So I'm not Pollyanna, but there's no point being fatalistic. It only helps the rich, greedy, climate-destroying wreckers who like things the way they are. So don't give them that. Give them hope. They'll hate you for it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.